There's another reason knowing doesn't change behavior, and it's one of the most misunderstood parts of psychology. Knowing creates intention, but intention is fragile. Intention lives in the mind. Behavior lives in context. The moment your environment changes, intention weakens. You can intend to save, then stress shows up. You can intend to invest, then uncertainty hits. You can intend to budget, then life interrupts, and intention collapses. This is why people blame themselves when they should be redesigning their environment. Behavior follows cues, not beliefs. If your environment makes spending easy and saving effortful, knowledge won't win. If your environment rewards impulse and punishes patience, insight won't survive. This is why change feels inconsistent. You're trying to use thought to override systems that were never designed for thought. Another issue is that knowing increases self-judgment. Once you know better, mistakes feel heavier. You don't just feel regret, you feel shame. I should have known better. That shame doesn't motivate correction, it motivates concealment. So people hide mistakes from themselves. They avoid tracking, they avoid review. Not because they don't care, but because knowing raised the emotional stakes. This is how knowledge can paradoxically reduce engagement. The smarter people are, the harsher they judge themselves. And the harsher the judgment, the stronger the avoidance. Another overlooked reason insight doesn't translate is because people confuse understanding with commitment. Understanding is passive, commitment is active. You can understand something deeply without committing to it. Commitment requires constraint. It means saying no to alternatives. It means closing doors. Most people avoid commitment because it feels like loss, so they keep options open. They stay flexible. They delay locking in behavior. But flexibility feels good short-term and costs you long-term. Progress requires narrowing. Another reason knowing fails is that people don't practice under emotional load. They make plans when calm, then abandon them when stressed, so the plan never gets tested in real conditions. It's like rehearsing only in perfect weather and quitting when it rains. Behavior that only works when life is easy is not a system, it's a wish. The people who change build systems that survive bad days. They assume they'll be tired, they'll be tempted, they'll be distracted, and they design around that. Knowledge doesn't do that automatically. Another powerful distinction is between explanation and execution. Most advice explains what works. Very little shows how to live it daily. Explanation creates clarity. Execution creates skill. And skill is built through repetition, not insight. This is why people can explain money perfectly and still feel clumsy using it. They haven't practiced enough. Practice feels slow, unimpressive, unglamorous, so they skip it. They keep learning instead. Another factor is emotional timing. People often try to change money behavior during emotionally charged moments, after a mistake, after a scare, after a realization. Those moments feel urgent, but urgency is unstable. Change that starts in emotion often ends in emotion. Sustainable change starts in calm, but calm doesn't feel motivating, so people wait for intensity, and intensity fades. Another reason knowing doesn't stick is because people expect behavior to align immediately. They don't allow for lag, but the nervous system changes slowly. You may act differently before it feels normal. You may feel uncomfortable long after the behavior is right. If you expect alignment too soon, you'll assume something's wrong, and you'll stop. The people who succeed expect misalignment. They expect the behavior to feel awkward. They expect the emotion to catch up later, and it does. Another subtle trap is moralizing money behavior. People label actions as good or bad instead of useful or helpful. This creates emotional weight. Every mistake feels like a moral failure. Every slip feels like proof that they're
That weight makes engagement exhausting. The people who change treat money behavior as neutral, data, not judgment, feedback, not identity. That neutrality keeps them engaged long enough to improve. Another reason insight doesn't change behavior is because people underestimate how long rewiring takes. They think awareness should be enough, but habits formed over years don't dissolve in weeks. The brain needs repeated evidence. Each repetition strengthens the new pattern. Each avoidance strengthens the old one. Consistency matters more than insight density. One good insight repeated daily beats 100 insights applied once. If you're listening and feeling frustrated with yourself, here's the key shift. Stop asking, "Why don't I do what I know?" Start asking, "What makes the right behavior easier than the wrong one?" That question leads to solutions. It moves you from self-criticism to design. You stop trying to become a different person and start building systems for the person you already are. That's how change becomes realistic. Because money behavior isn't a test of character, it's a response to structure. When structure changes, behavior follows. In the next video, I'll break down how to design an environment and system that turns correct knowledge into automatic behavior. Not through willpower, not through discipline, but through alignment. Because knowing what to do is common. Building a life where doing it is easy is rare. And that's the difference that actually changes outcomes.
Most people don't struggle with money because they don't know what to do. They struggle because knowing doesn't translate into change. They've watched the videos, read the books, heard the advice. Save more, spend less, invest consistently, think long-term. They understand it. And yet, nothing changes. This gap between knowing and doing is one of the most frustrating experiences people have with money. Because once you know better, staying stuck feels like a personal failure. But it isn't. The problem isn't intelligence. It isn't awareness. It isn't information. It's where that information lives. Knowledge lives in the conscious mind. Money behavior lives in the nervous system. And those two don't automatically talk to each other. Understanding something intellectually does not mean your body is prepared to act on it. This is why people can explain compound interest perfectly while still living paycheck to paycheck. Why they can spot bad financial decisions in others but repeat them themselves. Why insight feels powerful in the moment and useless later. Because insight alone doesn't rewire behavior. Let's break this down. Your brain has two systems making decisions. The slow analytical system that understands logic, numbers, and long-term consequences, and the fast emotional system that reacts to stress, fear, boredom, and relief. Most financial advice speaks only to the first system, but almost all real money decisions are made by the second. When you're calm, reflective, and thinking about the future, logic wins. When you're tired, stressed, rushed, or emotionally triggered, logic goes offline, and the nervous system takes over. That's why people say, "I know I shouldn't have done that." They're telling the truth. They did know, but knowledge wasn't in control. Another reason knowing doesn't change behavior is because information doesn't remove emotional friction. You can know that saving is important and still feel deprived. You can know that investing works and still feel scared. You can know that budgeting helps and still feel restricted. Those feelings don't disappear just because you understand the math. And feelings drive action. This is where people get confused. They assume that once they know better, action should be easy. When it isn't, they blame themselves. I must be lazy. I must lack discipline. Something is wrong with me. What's actually happening is emotional override. The nervous system prioritizes safety and comfort over logic. So when an action feels emotionally threatening, the body resists it, even if the mind agrees with it. Another reason insight fails is because it creates pressure. Once you know, you feel like you should act. And should is one of the fastest ways to trigger resistance. Threat response narrows focus.
Narrow focus reduces flexibility. So instead of empowering you, knowledge can increase anxiety. That anxiety makes action harder. This is why people often feel motivated right after learning something new, then overwhelmed shortly after. The insight raises expectations faster than behavior can catch up, and that gap feels uncomfortable, so the brain avoids it. Another subtle issue is that knowing creates identity conflict. Once you know what to do, your current behavior feels inconsistent with who you think you should be. That inconsistency creates cognitive dissonance. The brain wants to resolve it. There are two ways to do that: change behavior or rationalize behavior. Rationalization is easier. So people tell themselves, "I'll start next month. This isn't the right time. I need a better plan first." These explanations reduce discomfort without requiring change. Knowledge becomes something you agree with, not something you embody. Another reason insight doesn't stick is because people mistake clarity for capacity. Understanding what to do doesn't mean you currently have the emotional bandwidth to do it. If you're overwhelmed, exhausted, or stressed, your system is already overloaded. Adding new behaviors without removing stress creates friction, so the body resists. This is why change fails during burnout. Not because people don't care, but because their system can't absorb more. Another key issue is that most knowledge is abstract. It lives in ideas, not routines. You understand principles, but principles don't execute themselves. Execution requires structure. Without structure, knowledge stays theoretical. This is why people say, "I know all this, I just don't do it." Doing requires reducing choice. Reducing choice feels restrictive, so people keep options open. And open options mean inconsistent behavior. The people who change don't know more, they decide less. They remove decision points, they automate actions, they reduce emotional negotiation. That's how behavior changes. Another thing knowledge doesn't do is retrain emotional associations. If money has been associated with stress, fear, or shame for years, that association doesn't disappear overnight. Even when you know what to do, engaging with money can still trigger discomfort. So people avoid it. Avoidance isn't ignorance, it's emotional self-protection, and no amount of information fixes that on its own. Another trap is consuming insight as a substitute for progress. Learning feels productive. Understanding feels like movement. So people keep consuming content. They confuse clarity with change. But clarity without execution creates a false sense of advancement. It feels like you're improving when nothing is shifting. Eventually, that creates frustration, and frustration leads to disengagement. This is why people cycle through phases of intense learning followed by long periods of inaction. Another reason knowing doesn't change behavior is because people expect immediate transformation. They assume once they get it, everything should click. But behavior change is gradual. It requires repetition, exposure, adjustment. Expecting instant alignment sets people up for disappointment. When change feels slow, they assume it's not working, so they stop. The people who succeed lower their expectations for how change feels. They expect awkwardness, they expect resistance, they expect inconsistency. And they keep going anyway. Another powerful insight is that behavior changes identity, not the other way around. Most people wait to feel like someone who's good with money, but that identity only forms after consistent behavior. You don't become disciplined and then act. You act, then see yourself differently. Waiting reverses the process, and reversed processes don't resolve. Another overlooked factor is emotional reward. Bad money habits often provide immediate emotional payoff: comfort, relief, distraction, control. Good habits often don't, at least not at first. So the brain naturally favors the habits that feel better now. Knowledge doesn't change that reward structure. Only repetition does. Over time, the emotional payoff shifts. Stability feels better than chaos. Predictability feels safer than impulse. But that shift requires staying consistent long enough for the nervous system to adapt. Most people stop too early. The final piece is that knowing what to do often lacks personal meaning. Advice is general, but behavior is personal. Until you attach action to your own values, identity, and future, it remains abstract. People don't change for information, they change for reasons. And those reasons have to be felt, not just understood. If you're listening to this and thinking, I know all this, but I'm still stuck, that's not hypocrisy. It's human psychology. You don't need more insight, you need translation. Translation from idea into environment, from principle into routine, from intention into default behavior. That's the real work. In the next video, I'll show how to bridge that gap, how to turn knowledge into behavior without relying on motivation, willpower, or constant self-control. Because knowing what to do is common, actually doing it is rare. And the difference between the two is not intelligence, it's design.